A picture of a smashed car barely balancing on the edge of a cliff, overlooking the raging ocean below, is what first caught my attention. What was found inside this car is shocking. This car was then linked to a family home, and what was found inside that home is nothing short of calculated, cruel, and sadistic. Just a warning that this case deals with family annihilation and child murders. Hi guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Zara, and on this channel, we talk about true crime. So if you're interested, please join the fam, hit that subscribe button and hit the like button too. It really helps out the channel. And share the video if you like. Elmer Crawford was born in Canada in 1930 and grew up with his grandparents in Derry, Ireland before moving to Australia in 1951. He soon got a steady job at the Victorian Racing Commission. He worked as a telephone engineer and then as an electrician, but an unlicensed one. In the late 1950s, he went to an Irish dance event where he met a woman named Therese McManus. Therese was originally from Ipswich in Queensland, and when she was 21, she moved down to Victoria to work as a nursing aide at Caulfield Convalescent Hospital. Therese came from a big, loud Catholic family, and like her siblings, she moved away from home to live a more exciting life. She was friendly, outgoing, bubbly, and was always the life of the party. She was always down to go to dances with her friends, and it was one of these nights out that she met this Irishman, Elmer. Their relationship was a fast romance, and soon after they began dating, Therese felt pregnant. So coming from a Catholic family, they decided to marry in 1957. Therese was 21 at the time and Elmer was 27. They bought a house on Cardinal Road in the suburb of Glenroy and soon had their first child, a baby girl named Catherine. They went on to have two more children, Jamie in 1960 and Karen in 1962. Elmer was like a typical dad. He was a manly man, a handyman. He was very good at electrical work and he still worked at the VRC as an unqualified telephone mechanic. He was a quiet man, very soft-spoken with a thick Irish accent, and his coworkers would sometimes say that he would work for hours without saying a single word to anyone else. Nobody really knew him well. They didn't know what his wants and desires were, but one thing they knew that was important to Elmer was work and money. He never talked much about his family and his past in Ireland, and he rarely said much about his current family with his wife and kids. He was known to have a temper. One time there was something wrong with his car and he had already had this problem before and he had this problem fixed, but it was now broken again and he got so upset that he smashed every single panel of his car with a tire iron. He was known to be quite tight with their money, even though he had a considerable amount of money, for that time at least, saved up. He had over $6,000 in the bank. His house on Cardinal Road was nearly fully paid off and he owned 3 blocks of land in Queensland. He was also planning to buy another block of land in the same suburb of Glenroy because at the time that area was coming up. He even took part in building his own home. He was very good at those kinds of things. He could fix most things. So he seemed to build a good amount of wealth for his family, sort of, because according to friends, Therese believed they were poor. Maybe because Elmer was also a thief. For years, he had been stealing money and other items from his employer, the Victorian Racing Club. He would steal meters and meters of copper wire. He would burn the insulation off and then go to secondhand auction shops to sell all these rolls of copper wire. He would really steal anything he could get his hands on, really. Grass seeds, 20-cent coins from when he worked as a car park attendant. He would just find these 20-cent coins and like steal them. Toilet paper, just anything he could grab quickly, and he would hide them in a roof cavity in his house. It is believed that Therese and some other family and friends knew about his sticky hands, but no one really said or did anything about it. And maybe that's why Therese believed they were poor, that he needed to steal to keep the family afloat, when in reality, he had money, plenty of it. The things he stole, apart from the copper wire, were really worth very little, And he was willing to risk his job, his reputation, and serve time behind bars for silly things, which makes you think that he didn't really think of his family during this time. He did it all for himself. In early 1970, 35-year-old Therese fell pregnant with their fourth child. During this time, life remained the same for the family. Elmer went to work. Therese looked after the kids. She was a stay-at-home mom. The kids went to school, and on most days, Elmer would go into his garage and tinker with his electrical items and fix things around the house after work. He was always available to help his neighbors with anything handy or help kids fix a bike tire and things like that. But in late June 1970, Elmer went on a 2-week holiday from his job at the VRC. During this time, he began cleaning the house furiously. He would burn these large loads of rubbish in his backyard, go to the rubbish tip and dump a car full of junk, and then just repeat the process. Neighbors had seen him do this, and many at first thought the house was actually on fire from all the smoke that was billowing above it, but he was just having these constant bonfires. He had told neighbors that he was using this time off work to fix up his garage and raise the roof high enough so they could fit their family caravan inside of it. But it was clear to neighbors he didn't actually finish this job, as the family caravan just lay parked on the lawn several days later, even after he was supposed to be done with this time off work. Elmer was due to go back to work on Wednesday, July 1st, 1970, but he didn't go back just yet. That same day at around 10:30 a.m., a beauty saleswoman named June went over to visit Therese, but Therese did not entertain her or give her a cup of tea like she normally would. Today, her youngest daughter, 6-year-old Karen, was at home sick from school, so she didn't have time to. June saw Elmer at home too. He was cleaning their family car. She saw that the back seat of the car was resting up against the front of the car on the outside, and June had never actually met Elmer before, as he was usually at work. So she said hello to him while Therese and her sat on the front porch, but Elmer just nodded and didn't continue the conversation. He wasn't interested. He continued cleaning the car. Later that evening, the two sisters, Catherine and Karen, they walked down to the local shops and then they had dinner before the kids were put to bed at around 7:30 or 8 p.m. Right next door to the Crawford house was a Salvation Army hall. The members knew that every Sunday during the church service, Elmer would be banging around his house, tinkering with things and using his loud power tools, mow the lawn, etc. But Wednesday nights were usually quiet, as it was a school night and the kids were in bed early. That night, the members, they gathered at that Salvation Army hall at about 6 p.m. and had their weekly choir practice. At around 8:30 p.m., they heard some very strange noises coming from the direction of the Crawford house. They heard doors being slammed, loud footsteps from the garage, and a dragging or a scraping sound, noises like concrete was being hit, and then finally a loud thud sound, like something was being slammed shut. When the members were done with their practice, they made their way out to their cars and noticed that the Crawford's car was no longer parked in the driveway like it usually was. The next morning, July 2nd, 1970, it was a cold winter's morning in Melbourne. A group of tourists had been on a scenic drive along Victoria's iconic Great Ocean Road, and along the way they stopped at another world-famous landmark known as the 12 Apostles, which is this collection of limestone formation sea stacks that are huge. Some are like 45 meters tall. And then in the early afternoon, tourists then gathered at the beautiful Loch Ard Gorge near Port Campbell National Park on the southwest coast of Victoria. Loch Ard Gorge has this smooth, lustrous bay and an inlet of clear blue water, and it's flanked by yellow washed cliff faces and sprinkling of this beautiful vibrant greenery. And although it's so beautiful, it has an even more interesting history. It is the site of the most famous shipwreck, the English Loch Ard ship. Since then, it's become a backdrop in many movies and millions of tourists come to sightsee these areas every year. So it's surrounded by these jagged cliff tops, and many trails and lookouts are there for tourists to just walk along and sightsee. And There are some areas that literally drop down to the ocean below. You can stand on the very edge and look straight into the ocean below, especially in the 1970s, although it can be very unsafe because the cliff edge can just break at any time and, you'll go down with it. So these tourists, they were walking along these trails, these beautiful trails looking into the beautiful ocean with these massive cliff drops. And then they saw some tire tracks leading away from the car park to one cliff edge. So the tourists followed this to the cliff edge and they saw something strange. Over 16 meters below, at the bottom of a second cliff drop, very close to the ocean below, where the waves were just crashing against the rocks, they saw a battered white 1956 Holden sedan. The windscreen was smashed. The front of the car was smashed like it had been, dropped on its head. The driver's door was wide open and it was literally balancing on the cliff's edge. I believe a third of it was like off the cliff and had been balancing on that edge from the moment it landed there. But as they looked closer, they saw a thin black tubing hanging out of the car. Obviously, this wasn't part of the tour, so the tourists had to go back into the town of Port Campbell to let the local police know what they had found. But by the time rescue workers got there, it was dark, and a man named George, who was with the local rescue volunteer squad, he went down to have a look at the car. He did see some blood and noticed a strong smell coming from the car, and debris was just scattered all around the car. It was like half-eaten apples, biscuits, a roll of electrical tape, a butter knife, a plastic slip-on shoe, and some .22 caliber bullets. He then saw that the black hose was connected to the exhaust and managed to open the back door without the car toppling over the cliff. Inside the car, he saw some other items and then a .22 caliber rifle, which he was able to get, but nothing else could be done since it was dark, so they just called him back up to the top. But they knew that the car didn't get there on its own, right? So someone either drove off the cliff, the driver could have very well drowned in the ocean below, or someone pushed this car off the cliff. So they did have the number plate of the car, so they tracked it down to its owner, Elmer Crawford. Police arrived at the Crawford house at about 6:30 p.m. that night, but no one answered the door. It looked like no one was home. They checked in with neighbors, but no one had seen anything suspicious that day, and one of the neighbors did mention that Elmer had been on holidays recently. So maybe at the end of his holidays, he took his family away and they went home that night. The two police officers, Constable John McCarty and Detective Brian Wild, went back to the police station to report their findings, but it just didn't feel right. Something didn't feel right. I mean, the family car is down on a cliff over 3 hours away from this family home, and the entire family is missing. So the two officers were then sent back to the Crawford home at 10:30 p.m. and they were told to break into the home. And what they saw was terrifying. There were leftovers from breakfast sitting out on the dining table, dirty dishes in the sink. The kids' bedrooms had both beds unmade, and blankets on the bed were soaked with blood. The bed in the master bedroom was also soaked with blood, and the floors were just splattered with blood. The keys of the Holden car were also found on the breakfast table, which was interesting because no keys were found in the ignition of the car on the cliff. A note was left for the milkman to ensure no more deliveries of milk were made, and back in the day, bread would be delivered fresh to houses like milk was, and a loaf of bread was found untouched outside the home that clearly had been delivered that day but not taken in. In the lounge room, they found an unfinished letter written by Therese to her sister expressing disappointment at falling pregnant again. She wrote, "I have been so upset, but what's the use? I'm 2.5 months now, so it looks like I've had it this time. We were going to come up this Christmas, but won't be able to now as I'll be due at the end of January." There was also an article from the newspaper The Age called "A Mother's Agony" laid out on the table, which discussed opposing views of the abortion debate. Did this point to Therese wanting an abortion? When the home's backyard was searched, they found remnants of black rubber hosing, the same one found attached to the car's exhaust, and a bench seat that was the back seat of the Holden car. There was burnt grass where the bonfires had taken place and metal bins with ropes and blood inside. Then there was a huge trail of blood leading from the back door of the house to the garage. Nothing was stolen from the home though. Elmer and Therese's wedding rings were found sitting on the mantle in the home. There were also signs that the blood on the carpets were attempted to be cleaned because there were wet patches and a bottle of upholstery cleaning solution on the coffee table. Police believed the family had been attacked while they were sleeping on Wednesday night and were already injured or dead by Thursday morning based on the mass amounts of blood that was found in the home. On Friday morning, the police and emergency responders were able to pull the car over the cliff back onto land using cables and a tractor. And upon opening the car doors and looking inside, this time in broad daylight, one of the responders said, "I see a foot." After carefully uncovering the blankets in the back, they found the body of Therese, and surrounding her, entangled in blankets, were the bodies of her 3 children, Catherine, James, and Karen. They were all wearing their pajamas and had horrific injuries inflicted upon them. The children specifically had intense head injuries. 6-year-old Karen and 8-year-old James had 1 blow to the head, while 12-year-old Catherine had over 21 injuries to the side and the middle of her head. 2 hammers were found in the car, and police believed that these may have been the murder weapons. Therese also suffered 1 head wound, but there were burn marks on her ears and in between her thumb and index finger. An alligator clip was found in the car with an electrical lead attached, and this matched the burn marks on Therese. Was she electrocuted? The autopsy showed that all 3 children were bashed in their sleep. Then James and Catherine were later electrocuted. Therese was bashed in her sleep, but was likely only unconscious when she was then also later electrocuted as well. When Therese's stomach was opened, her 3-month-old fetus was discovered as the 5th victim. Elmer was nowhere to be found, and he was the police's number 1 suspect. But Elmer was never seen again. And soon, everything that took place began to unravel based on the evidence that was left behind. It's believed that these murders were motivated by a couple of things. One was Therese's 4th pregnancy, and from the letter Therese wrote to her sister, it led police to believe that Therese was not happy about her pregnancy, and a neighbor did state that she confided in her that she suffered from severe postnatal depression after Karen's birth. And despite being unhappy, she was a devout Catholic, and maybe Elmer was the one pushing her to have an abortion, to which Therese refused. Next were the thefts. Maybe the marriage was already on the rocks due to this unwanted pregnancy, and Elmer continued stealing from work and, was soon going to be found out. Maybe in an argument, Therese threatened to expose him. Maybe she said, "If you don't stop, I will go to the police." Maybe she didn't want Elmer to keep risking their family's future with his petty thefts. Elmer had $6,000 in the bank, owned the Glenroy house and blocks of land in Queensland. He had a lot to lose from a divorce because in reality, they were well off. He had a lot of money relative to that time. He earned $5,000 a year, which is more than $70,000 today. Maybe he decided that being alone was his best option. So he began planning. Elmer would have been planning this night for weeks, if not months. The reason for his holiday shortly before the murders? To get everything in order. He cleaned out loads and loads of trash from the home. He had drafted new wills with Therese just weeks prior to leave everything, the house, the money, for him. Although he was unlicensed, he was an experienced electrician and knew a lot about cables and fuses. They found that he had rewired some of the fuses in the family's home fuse box with thicker wires so it could not blow out. He removed the back seat from his car to fit more rubbish inside, but we all know what he fit inside that area later. The night of Wednesday, July 1st, when the Salvation Army members heard those noises, that's when it all allegedly began. The kids had all settled into their beds at around 7:30 p.m. and shortly after that, Therese changed into her nightgown, ready for bed. Elmer then bashed her over the head one time with a lead pipe, leaving her unconscious. He then sickeningly attached alligator clips to her ear and the fleshy area of her hand. The clip was attached to an electrical lead with a 3 plug point at the other end, a homemade electrocution device. He then turned it on and electrocuted his pregnant wife to death. It's presumed he killed her first because as a mother, she would have done anything to save her kids. He then moved on to the girls' bedroom while his daughters lay asleep in their beds in their blue and white floral pajamas. He smashed a hammer in their heads. He then electrocuted Catherine the same way, but when he moved on to Karen, he realized that the one blow to the head had killed his baby girl. It's believed that through all this commotion, James came out of his room when Elmer did the same horrific acts to his only son. He then placed his pregnant wife and 3 children in the back of his Holden car, wrapped them in blankets, and drove them 3 hours to Lockhart Gorge. What's even more twisted to me is that because this cliff is just open, it's just an open cliff edge, a ditch was dug on the edges to prevent, I guess, cars from rolling over. But even in the dark, after murdering his entire family, Elmer was handy enough to collect rocks nearby and build a makeshift bridge to roll the car over and off the edge. Once at the cliff's edge, he fed a rubber hose into the exhaust pipe and secured it over the roof and into the side window, rolling up the window tightly so the hose stayed attached. He then tied a rope from the steering wheel to the trunk so that the car could only move forward in a straight line. And then he put the car in neutral and rolled the car off the cliff, hoping it would land in the ocean. But it was raining and cold at night. Elmer most likely did not know that the car did not land in the water. Due to the rain, he couldn't get too close to the cliff's edge to check where it landed because he could have slipped and fallen himself. Strangely enough, it's believed Elmer may have chosen this location because he went camping there quite often on his own, and he was, quite fond of this area and hence chose to dispose of his entire family there. The reason he may not have wounded Therese more is because he might have wanted it to look like a murder-suicide, that Therese was distraught over this final pregnancy and wanted it all to end. So she killed her kids by gassing them in the car and letting it roll off the cliff. Police believe following this, Elmer then rode his motor scooter all the way back home. Why? Because the scooter was still at the house the following morning. At 8:15 a.m. on the morning of July 2nd, it was a Thursday, and 12-year-old Brenda walked over to the Crawfords' house and knocked on the door. Brenda was Catherine's friend from school, and they walked to school together daily. That day, Elmer opened the door. Brenda asked for Catherine. He told Brenda Catherine was not feeling well and she wouldn't be going to school that day, and watched as Brenda walked down the driveway. She thought Elmer was creepy from that encounter alone. At around 6 p.m. that evening, another witness saw Elmer in his driveway looking around the streets before walking back inside. This means that the morning after his family's bodies were pushed down a cliff 3 hours away, Elmer had breakfast at home and was in no rush to leave until 6:30 p.m. that evening when the police knocked on his door. It's believed that Elmer was attempting to clean up the bloodstains on the carpet when he heard the police knock on his door. Due to the evidence of the cleaning solution being left behind, it was left with the lid off and the solution was foamy, indicating that it had been recently used. But Elmer, he stayed still and he stayed silent. Then when the police returned at 10:30 p.m., Elmer was gone. He must have realized the police were already on the case, and that means in the 4 hours between, Elmer managed to escape without being seen or heard. However, his motor scooter and bike were still at the home, so how did he escape? By bus? Did he hitch a ride? Did he have someone help him? The sightings of Elmer the day after his family were killed led police to believe that Elmer was the one who murdered his entire family. The way they were killed, electrocution, only solidified the fact. No one remembered the couple arguing or fighting. Therese never complained about Elmer to her friends and her neighbors. Elmer was seen playing with his kids and showing affection towards them. The kids were known to be good kids. It was shocking to the entire neighborhood, let alone the entire country, that a man could do this to his own family. Murder them in a deliberate, planned attack in a gruesome, cruel way, and then just disappear. If the car had fallen directly into the water, it's theorized that Elmer would have told neighbors, Therese and the kids, move to Queensland to be with her family while awaiting the new baby's arrival. He would have had the time to sort out the house, sell it, gather up all his money, and then disappear that way. By the time the car would be found, he could claim that Therese, killed the kids with the hose through carbon monoxide poisoning, a murder-suicide. But since the car was found sooner than expected, he had to leave everything and run. His bank accounts were never touched since that day, so it's assumed that through, all his stealing and secretive ways, he must have had enough cash to keep him going. Since he was also so handy and knowledgeable, he could have easily made money along the way doing, cash in hand jobs. He may have prepared himself for a life on the run. But then what was the point of all that money? What was the point of these murders? He could have easily done that without killing his family. He could have just left. Pictures of Elmer were circulated Australia-wide, but no sightings of him were reported. And if they were reported, it was always a case of mistaken identity or just false rumors. Back then, it was easier to vanish, right? Limited technology to track a person, no need for ID to even open a bank account, no CCTV cameras. He could have easily altered his looks, gotten a job, and settled down somewhere remote. Another theory is that he went overseas, maybe back home to Ireland, maybe New Zealand, because in that time, Australians could fly to New Zealand without any documentation. In the year 2017, a former truck driver from Pilbara, WA, who identified himself as Nugget, came forward to police believing he may have encountered Elmer. He said he met this man who told him he'd moved to Pilbara from Melbourne in the year 1970, and Nugget asked this man, where is your wife? And he responded, she's long gone. When he asked why he moved down to Pilbara, the man replied, I had to leave in a hurry. I did something terrible. Nugget then asked the man, you aren't that bloke that police are looking for, right? Nugget says the man's demeanor completely changed. He kind of looked like, oh shit, I've said too much. But again, nothing came from that lead. There's a book written by Greg Fogarty, who grew up on the same street as the Crawfords, and it's called Almost Perfect. And it details his lifelong obsession with finding out the truth about these murders. I really want to read that book and see his insight on the crime. I feel like it'll just be a different perspective. Elmer would now be 95 years old, and a $100,000 reward for any information still stands as of November 2024. The Crawford family is buried together in a grave in the Faulkner Cemetery, without Elmer, of course. Their memory now lives on through their loved ones. And when we talk about them, when we talk about cases like this case really, really sickened me when I first read about it, because what does it remind you of? Chris Watts, both with pregnant wives and multiple kids. And sadly, there's many cases just like this. I don't get it. How can murder be better than just leaving them? Leave your family. Elmer, Chris would have just been better off just leaving their family. If you care about what people are going to think about you if you leave them, don't you care what people are going to think if you kill them? It's so dumb and so infuriating at this point that murder is just the first option for people like this. It's even more infuriating that Elmer was never caught. What's the point now at 95 years old? Did he go on to have another family? Did he harm anyone else? He's definitely capable of it. It's just insane he got away with it. Went on to live many more decades free. Even if he was on the run, he was free. I don't really know if we'll ever really know what happened to him. I mean, there is a question of, well, how do you know Elmer even did it? But I mean, you know, nobody else would harm a family like that. No one else would just do that to a pregnant woman and 3 small children for no reason. There was nothing to gain. And the fact that he was seen at the house that morning, witnesses saw him. I mean, he could have been smart enough to just not even be seen, but he clearly had no guilt. He had no like worries about it. He was just chilling at the house, having breakfast, gathering his things, cleaning up the blood off the carpet. I think he thought that the car wasn't going to be found and he was just going to clean up the house and live there a little bit longer until he could actually run away or just live his life normally, claiming that, oh my God, the bodies are found in this car at the edge of the cliff. You know, Therese killed the kids. She didn't want to be with me. She didn't want to be a mom. She was suffering through postpartum depression. Just blame it on her, you know? It really feels like that was his plan. The fact that he was able to just literally vanish in a span of 4 hours, like today that would never happen, I don't think. I don't think that you could get away with this now. There's just too much technology and cameras and people take videos of things all the time. Like he would have been caught. Rest in peace to Therese and those 3 beautiful kids. I mean, from the limited photos that you can see online, it just breaks your heart to see that these kids never had a chance. And neither did Therese. Let me know your thoughts on this case down below, guys, and I will see you in next week's video. Besitos. Bye.